Everyone and welcome. Per the change to our rules and order of business, we will be holding the joint meeting with the school board as a workshop prior to the start of the council meeting. The city council meeting will begin after and at the conclusion of the workshop. So I'd like to invite the school board up and thank you for coming tonight.
You do have assigned seats, yes. Sorry.
And we have to guess.
One through seven, that way.
No, so 1 through 7.
So one, no, but you have, am I the wrong one?
I don't know, it's messing with me, man. I'm still confused what's happening here.
You guys had copies of the memos in your packet. Okay.
No, I don't believe we did.
So the answer is no? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Again, thank you to the school board for coming and joining us tonight. And Superintendent Ray, if you'd like to start off.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. As you know, the school department is at the beginning stages of their budget, much like you guys probably are at the city council level. Certainly learning the process here in Saco, which moves a little bit faster than I'm used to. And again, I'm going to caution everybody about the speed of that, because typically in a school budget, you guys are making decisions in May, and a lot of things can happen between February and May. And so really trying to intentionally just put on the brakes just a little bit to make sure that when we have a budget in your hands, it has quality information, knowing that the biggest part of that information tends to be health insurance costs. And we don't tend to get a health insurance costs on the school department side until approximately the first week in April is where historically that comes. But what I wanted to do here tonight is kind of give you guys an overview of a memo I wrote to the school committee a couple of weeks ago that paints a pretty good picture of the starting point of our budget process and the revenues that we are working with. So one of the pieces that, again, throughout the budget process, and if you watch the city council meeting, the school committee meeting a couple of weeks ago, is you'll hear me talk about property valuation, as property valuation and student counts tend to be the driver of everything school funding wise. And here in Southern Maine, we certainly are seeing our property values increase. And when property values increase, that means that less money from the state will come our way, because the funding formula assumes that with more property valuation becomes a greater ability to pay. And so as we start off on page 1 of the memo that I provided to you, is that last year when we came on board and we were talking the budget in May and June, we talked about additional funds coming from the Department of Education, which they did. And last year we got approximately $1.6 million more after our budget had passed, and we were kind of planful to say, well, we know that we have a deficit running on the city side, and we're going to use that money to come in and pay that off and take care of that negative fund balance while also making sure that we had money to move forward on the school construction project, and also having a little bit of an additional revenue. Now, 6 months later comes a situation where your new funding formula comes out. And a couple of things changed for us is, one, student counts, like in every community in the state of Maine, tend to be going down. The student count in the state of Maine lost 2,500 students statewide, on our funding formula situation. And some of this is COVID related because obviously there were families last year who chose to homeschool or not attend school, and you're running off some averages. But your student count is approximately 55 students through a pre-K through 12 system less. You also have a situation where your land value is increasing. And if you go to kind of the second box here on the front page, I've shown for you what from 2016 till 2023, which would be the year that we're working on, what property valuation has done in the city. And so in 2016, it was a minus $9 million, whereas we move into the 3-year average today, and it's plus $165 million. And as we look towards what next year will be, as we look at the 3-year average moving into next year, because that data has been released, we're going to see Saco continue to grow even more and have a 3-year average of an increase of $181 million, which means less subsidy coming in there, more than likely, unless an additional money is pumped into general purpose aid. But when that all comes into effect, and we think about last spring when we had great news of an extra $1.6 million, that translates to a subsidy this year that while you still kind of got $1 million more than you had expected last year, you actually lost $514,000. So we're working with less subsidy this year than just 6 months ago. And what makes it a little more complicated is we chose not to, spend that money initially. So it puts us in a better situation that we didn't have to come up with a budget hole to start with. As we move through the budget process and we look at what our drivers, you look at what our drivers of costs. And if you look on page 2, there are pretty much 2 major drivers of increases in the budget. Rising wages, which have steps from teacher salaries and the additional amounts that have been negotiated in contracts for employees, and health insurance. And currently in this budget, we budgeted a 10% increase in health insurance. Now that's a little bit more than previous years. And the reason that we did that is that, number one, we look at our ratios that we get from the health insurance, and they were a little bit higher this year. And at some point in time, all of these costs from COVID are going to come back to health insurance companies. So looking at the higher end of things as a starting point, I'm one that always wants to, as we develop a budget, I like to paint the worst picture first and hope that things improve, instead of being here in May and say, oh, I budgeted 4% and it's really 10%, and now we're all scrambling. I'd rather be working from a different direction. So when you look at that piece, you look at a total cost of $1.1 million just to kind of move health insurance and salaries. And then there are certainly some things that as we look at our school department, there's a list of things that we've added to the budget throughout this with some positions. We do a lot of main care billing, and one of the things that needs to happen for main care billing is that 34% of any funds collected on main care billing, you have to pay what is a local share of that. So you need to budget a expenditure of 34% of what you expect to take in, because the DOE withholds that from you directly. So if we're looking at getting approximately $500,000 in revenue, we have to give back, or they take back, 34%. So in the past, that seed payment hasn't been budgeted as an expense because it is an expense, and that's another driver in there, is that we have $165,000 there. I also have had some really good conversations with the police chief and having discussions about where the funding for the SRO should sit. And we kind of made a determination that that 3/4 of that salary would sit on the school department side for this budget. So initially, we've placed 3/4 of the SRO salary in the school budget to make sure that it's accounted for. I think an SRO is something that is vitally important for us on the school department side. There's also costs for share of vocational funding, making sure that we have a substance abuse counselor at the middle school. There's shared services for our homeless liaison, making sure that we have a full-time social worker at Burns School for a school of 560 kids. We only had 4/5 of a time. Looking at tuition increases, and then looking at coursework. Now, obviously, throughout that, there are some decreases in the budget that we've looked at throughout the year, and some of that is looking at the superintendent's salary line where the shared service goes down, not filling 4 unfilled current ed tech positions, looking at a situation where currently we house some special ed programs in both of our elementary schools, and looking at having one program at Young School and one program at Fairfield School. It helps us with our staff ratios a little bit, and hopefully will also free up a room at Fairfield School so that art and music doesn't have to travel on a cart. That's something that we'd like to solve. Looking at some of our contracted services for nursing that we think that we can make some savings on, and then also contracted services for IEP support. We are looking at reallocating, as I'll propose to the school committee, 2 positions from the special education department to the reestablishing the alternative education program at SMS. We need to look at providing more supports for some of our students who need a little extra help, and that's something that went away that we really feel there's some value that will help kids, kind of gain that interest in school, so hopefully they're not at a situation where in the high school years they're having greater difficulties. Certainly, like everybody, school departments aren't immune to rising costs for heat, electricity, and so trying to figure out what those balances will actually be as people see their own electric bills at home, and you try to guess which month yours is going to go high. We do the same thing in the school department, and obviously not knowing what some of our oil prices will be yet for next year is something. Well, as you can see, that's going quite high as well, at over $4 a gallon for a consumer. Obviously, as a bulk rate, we'll get much cheaper than that. And then we continue to look at equitable services between all schools and any shared services in purchasing that we can make. So when you see all of those things and you see some rising costs, you initially think, so, okay, this is really bad news. And certainly, I look at the amount that it increases from year to year, and I still have some questions about what are all the drivers for those increases. But when you begin to put this all together and you start looking at your revenue situation for the current year, and you see a budget that has a 3.6% expenditure increase, which is a little higher than I would like for things to be on a year-to-year basis. But when I look at the revenue side of the picture, and that's why I believe it's always important to show both at the same time. Right now, the budget that we have, and certainly there's a lot of alterations that will need to be made before we present something final to you. This has an increase to on the revenue offset of $219,000 to the taxpayers. Now, certainly when you guys get the calculators out and calculate mill rates and all of the valuation pieces, we know that that can change. But right now you're at 0.77% increase to the taxpayers based off what's here today. Now, while this calculates and brings into all of the pieces that we need to run programming in the school department. One of the things that, as I've gotten to know the schools over the last couple of months, there are certainly some concerns that I have on the capital side of things. And in this budget, you'll see the next memo, which is some pretty good news for us, is that we were successful in writing some revolving renovations grants. And this is something that the city council would have to act upon, along with the public, is that we applied through the Department of Education for some revolving renovations funds. And what that is, it's a pot of money that's allocated to schools. And if you are successful, the state of Maine will allow you to go with some planned upgrades. And in this situation, they will cover 50% of the costs. The rest of the costs are on a 10-year bond payment at 0% interest. So anytime you can get someone to cover half and you repay it at no interest, I really will advise us to look at those situations. What this would allow us to do, and the first project would be an upgrade of some of the ADA bathrooms at Fairfield School. My advice to both the school committee and the city council will be to put forward these projects as planned, but we have some decisions to make about all of our elementary schools, so just because we say we may do the project doesn't mean that a decision might be made that we wouldn't want to do something at Fairfield School. I think that's still a little bit up in the air. Also allows us to replace exterior doors at Fairfield School, which is a much smaller number, and that is something that I would recommend that we do with 5 years or more left in any of our elementary buildings. Exterior doors are in rough shape in there. At the middle school, it allows us to address two major needs. One is over $1 million in air quality and ventilation systems that get to be addressed there, and all of the exterior doors at SMS. And those are things that are greatly needed. What I would like to do to the city council and to the school committee is at some point I really would like to ask you to join me some afternoon or call and reach out on an appointment. And I'd like you guys to tour SMS, because SMS is a facility that is 100% after all school is going to be standing. And as we walk around the district and we look at things, a couple of things that we tend to notice is that this board in the last years, and with the city council, we put $500,000 in last year's budget to fix the roof, which we're going to do. And we've got another $500,000 in our budget to address roofing issues and revolving renovations, which would be air quality. Those are some really good steps forward. At the same time, we need to look at just the overall appearance of SMS. From paint in the hallways, to ceiling tiles, to the fact that our children sit in desks that I'm pretty sure, Nathan, we could probably find your name scratched into one of those up there, maybe. They're still there, and I think Kevin had one. Is that we look at our furniture in our middle school, and it's horrible, and we're better than that. We're looking at 40-year-old furniture, horrible chairs for kids. And as we look at our community and the outward appearance that we give at that school, we need to put some attention into that building. And so I'd like to invite any of you to reach out to me, hopefully not all individually. We could go in some groups, but I'd like to walk you through there so that you can actually put your eyes on it. Because as we move through this budget situation, we have to look at that outward appearance that our middle school gets, whether that be from student furniture to painting the hallways to making sure that when you walk into the reception office, it feels like a welcoming environment that you're going to have for your middle school kids. It's a real deficit, and I wish that I had more eyes on things quicker so that could have been here in the budget, but between health insurance and some other things, I hope that we can get to a point where we can say, hey, let's make a commitment to do some of this work, because we can't wait we can't wait till another building, a new building gets done and maybe move some of the old furniture over at that point. We need to address some of these items. When you walk down the hallway and you look at the paint, or you walk into the principal's office and it's not painted the same color, we need to do a better job, and I'd like you guys to put your eyes on that piece. So I think we're off to a good start. I feel like, while I'm concerned about a 3% expenditure increase, I don't think that's out of the world in the environment that we're looking at, but we have a situation where we have a good revenue to handle it for this year as we continue to refine things. So hopefully it won't make a ton of late night meetings for you at the end of May, and that we can come into an understanding of where we need to be. And if the council is at a point where they have some understanding of what we need to do, Brian and I can sit down and make sure that we bring a product to you that meets those goals well beforehand, and that we have a game plan put together. So, any questions?
Any questions for Superintendent Ray? Councilor Hatch?
Superintendent Ray, it's my first trip through a budget process. I appreciate the 30,000-foot view here, and you were really, you highlighted some aspects of the process that I really appreciate. Brian, I'd just like to go on record as being very, very willing to go on a tour at middle school. I haven't been there since my kids were there. And I don't know if you can
Yeah, if
just...
you want to coordinate, I don't, Jeremy, you want to...
Well, I'm just wondering, Brian, if you could set up, work with Jeremy, set up 2 or 3 dates and times, and just get a communication to the council and say, these are the dates and times, and we can take it upon ourselves to take the initiative to...
I'll work with Brian and put a couple of dates out there that we could meet in the afternoon time or in the evening. Because again, I think that we can talk about some of the challenges, but if any of you like me, I have to see things to really understand it.
Yeah, I'm with you there. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
Councilor Berman?
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Superintendent Ray. Really useful budget overview. I appreciate it. And I like the detail and your step-by-step of some of the needs. One of the things you didn't mention, I'm just wondering if you could speak about for a second, is student outcomes and curriculum, and where we kind of fit in relative to our neighbors and peers, and are we happy with where we are there aspirations, and how this budget and future budgets are going to address that?
So I think one of those things, Mike, what's really tough is when you look at where we are to our peers, is that we have 2 years of data over the last 2 that is pretty inconsistent. I know that Meg, we have done the fall, where is Meg? There she is. We have done the fall and winter administration of the NWEA, which is the new state assessment this year. But Meg, I haven't seen anything come out that compares us to where we might be to our peers around the state to look at those pieces. So I think a couple of problems, Mike, is inconsistent data from the past, and then a new test without any comparison to around. So as we think about curriculum-wise, I think there are some things that Meg and I have seen probably more internally. One of those you'll see mentioned in there is that we have a math program K through 5 that does not necessarily line up with a consistent math program at the middle school, which is something that we hope to bring through, that Meg's working through now. I guess the rest of that question I want to turn over to Meg because she works more day-to-day in that piece.
I'll just start by saying that NWEA data for the state, that they're kind of piloting what those benchmarks are going to be and looking at the state data. So it's not clear to me whether we will get that at the close of this school year and they'll be able to kind of backtrack based on that benchmarking, or if they're just utilizing the data and then we'll begin that benchmarking publicly next year. So that's to be determined. We do have that focus, as Superintendent Ray shared, on the math programming and selecting that. We're utilizing grant funds to adopt and select a phonics-based program for our K2 students, and working with our ELA team to determine which one of those products will best serve our students and prepare our teachers to have students meet those literacy goals. And then we do have social studies and science teams that are meeting this year, but we've prioritized the math and the phonics in this this school year, and then we'll be looking to build into the budget for any social studies and science needs that are identified in further years.
Thank you. Any other questions from the council for school board? Superintendent Ray, I know that we just had a public forum last week on the updates with the school construction. Could you give us a little update on that?
Of course. So school construction is certainly, we're at a point where some bigger decisions need to start to be made. One of those is around program. And when we talk about program, we talk about basically which grade levels are going to be sitting at whatever a future site is going to be. We had 4 scenarios that we presented the other night, and they range from different configurations of grades 1 through 5, 2 through 5, an entire school, and then just an elementary school with some different possibilities of what gets built on a new site. Do you build a couple of new schools? Do you look at another building in town that can be renovated? So still a lot of options up in the air. We're starting to try to put some cost to that, which they did the other night, but again, you're looking at like high-level costs of saying X number of square foot and so on. The next steps will be, as we start to move towards the spring, is trying to narrow down those plots of land that are available to 3 to 4 sites so that we can do vernal pool testing that needs to happen during the month of April, May. And there's 4 sites that we are going to look at for that. We have received back our study on projected enrollments. The only kind of hiccup that we have on that is that the enrollments are based off the current pre-K situation that only has 7 classrooms versus a universal pre-K. And then we're at the point where, as we look at a site, start making those tough decisions of what are we going to build and how is that going to impact the community, and what, Mike, you think, and what Phil, what you think, and Nathan, and so forth. How do we take everybody's opinion and put something forward that we believe the voters will be able to support? And at the same time, I think that we have to be realistic also of what the state will support. And we've talked about that here before, is that the state operates off a debt limit as well. So only so much money, I believe it's like $120 million a year in debt payments are made, and that's in law. And so with rising construction costs, they run up against their debt limit as well. If you're, a couple of years ago, you were looking at 200 to 250 feet, dollars a square foot, and now those costs are well over 400 a square foot. So they have some management on their side of things, which will lead some choices for us locally. We are scheduling another site selection committee next week, Meg, or the week after?
Yeah, March 9th, I believe.
And from that point, we'll start looking at the vernal pool testing and trying to narrow down what is available for sites. Sites go pretty quick in town. And so we've got to be ready to move. We still have the aggressive timeline of something to be voted on in November. That may be a little bit too aggressive in this project. But I would say within a year's time, we certainly will be making a vote.
Great. Thank you. Councilor Hatch.
Superintendent Ray, on that subject of school body size, Saco, like many other southern Maine communities, is a tremendous amount of pressure on residential development, and I've had this latent concern that we try to build a new school based on current enrollments or past trends of declining enrollment, and all of a sudden we head in the other direction, and nobody can predict when that will happen, but it likely will. My question is, what can you do in this whole process to try to anticipate some growth and give us some additional capacity than perhaps what we think we need today?
So one of those pieces that will occur is that the state will look at those student population growth studies, and they won't deviate a lot from that. only because the trend over time is that all main schools tend to be having less and less population. And whether that is, whether your community grows, I think it's just, you don't see as many families of 4 or 5 kids as you used to. One of the things that 5 or 6 years ago, when we were talking about young school, you'd had the population study done, and when we were talking about it at the state in September when we were meeting up there, that number was almost on target exactly. One of the things that would be very challenging for us is that if we had population growth before we were in a new building, we have limited capacity right now in our schools. So, when you think about Fairfield School, while we're sitting here tonight talking about sharing programs between Young and Fairfield and hoping that we can get art and music back into a classroom and not on a cart, if we had to add one classroom because of a rising enrollment there, here we go, we're off again. We've talked about and will be talking about the situation at Young School where we have plans for an auxiliary building based off the number of space needed there and the number of building permits on that size, with also, certainly an eye on the future that 3 years' time from now, we'll have a pre-K lease that ends and we'll need to bridge a couple of years until we've, gotten into a new building, so that space would be very helpful. I think where that goes, Phil, is that if you are anticipating growth, and again, I would say this to anybody who is building a school is, one, make sure you design a building that's easy to add on to. And when you think about a building that may have a couple of stories to it, I remember one of my days in Westbrook when Westbrook Middle School was built, and there was a section of the 3rd floor that was all set up to have classrooms. It just wasn't built yet. And in the last few years, they've added that space. So that would be number one. And then, as a local municipality throughout the project, we will have the opportunity to talk about, do we want to build 3 extra classrooms on a building? Because it makes sense to do it now versus later. So I think that's a lot of the design process that we will, as locals, get to say, hey, you can probably build a project that would be 95% funded by the state, but you may want to say it makes a lot of sense to do a little bit additional locally so that you have space. And again, some of that space could be looking at where does CDS and 3-year-olds go at some point, because there will be that push. What does our rec department need? What does pre-K need? We visited a school in Falmouth. We visited their elementary school in Falmouth because it's a little bit larger of a school. And one of the unique options that they have that doesn't cost any money to the district because it's offset by a revenue is that they have rooms for childcare for their staff. And in an environment where we have to be more unique than others to attract quality staff, that may be something that wants to be part of the plan. I would love to have childcare for any of my staffs out there now because, you'd have the ability of having people who could just pick up on campus, drop off on campus. Added benefit, and with the expected teacher shortage that we're going to have in the next several years, we need to be that much more unique than everybody else.
My daughter teaches in Falmouth.
Yep.
And she's a kindergarten teacher.
Yep.
With on-site daycare. It's really amazing for me to see what that does to her life, her commitment to her profession, just her comfort in being a school teacher. I have another first-grade teacher daughter that works in South Portland with no on-site daycare. So you can do the compare and contrast quite easily, and I think your point is very well taken.
Yeah.
I think it's just a real appealing way to keep your staff in place. So I would highly recommend we do that if we can.
Thank you. Any other questions from councilors? Nope.
And I think that from our end, just any communication that we can have coming through, Brian and I will certainly talk about this, but as we get closer to that project of, as we think about as a community where we need to be budget-wise, I implore you guys to reach out to us and give us that heads up, because no one can come up with a good plan at 11 o'clock at night when we're thinking about dollars and cents. We want to be there saying strategically, this is what would happen, and it's my job to provide you guys with different options for both boards to say, if you do this, we'd have to do this, and X, Y, and Z. And so that constant communication, I think, would be great for us.
That's one thing that I would like to see. I was in attendance at the forum the other night, and the detail of the breakout of options was great. It was very informative. The only piece that I would like to see going forward is you gave the breakout, and then at the bottom it was the city cost, or cost to the city. That did not make any reference to the potential increase of the funds not being provided by the state. So when I looked at that, I'm like, well, that's not really a true number, because it could anywhere be, you know, from 10 more million to 30 million, or whatever the cost, depending on once we get the state percentage. So for resident information, if that could either just plus additional or non-funded cost.
And I think that's going to be probably a little ways out before you can kind of laser that in a little bit, because we need to get to the point where we know what program's going to be in school. And the reason that I say that is because as you think of, let's think of something like cafeterias and gyms. If you're building a school that's a K-2 school, you get X allotment based off square footage and size. If you're building a school that might be a 1 through 5 school, then you get a different allotment for gym space or cafeteria space, or how you have a stage. And so that's really a hard part for us right now, is until we get a better idea of exactly what we might be building, to refine those costs. And then it will open up to, much like buying a car, what kind of options go into that and what is funded, meaning having a conversation about, say, a theater.
So that price estimate that you gave was basically just based on square footage?
Correct.
Okay. Anyone else on the council? Any questions from the school board?
I don't have a question. I just wanted to point out for anyone who's here this evening or was unable to attend the last session that all of the presentations are on the school website, so you can pull those down. And the presentation that we're referring to right now that had the various options and costs and all of that, that's one of the presentations that's out there that anyone can pull down and take a look at if you were unable to attend.
Excellent, thank you. Any other updates from the school board? Okay, I guess that would conclude our workshop with the school board, and I thank you guys for coming and appreciate your time. We will take a 5-minute recess before the start of the actual council meeting. Greetings and welcome to the City of Saco Council meeting on Monday, February 28th, 2022. Time of the meeting is at 7:14. Let the record reflect that all councilors are present. Mayor Doyle has been excused, and tonight Deputy Mayor Jody McPhail will be presiding. We now invite you to join us with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item number 4 tonight, there is no general correspondence. Item 5, we have committee correspondence. Are there any committee correspondence to be brought by councilors? Okay, not seeing any. We move on to item number 6, public comment. Please remember to state your name and address, and speaking, you may remove your mask if you feel comfortable. First on the list, we have Inga Brown.
Hi, good evening. Inga Brown, 161 Simpson Road. I wanted to open this evening just with a very short message of unity and compassion for the people of Ukraine. I'm sure our wider Saco community feels the same, and that we stand together in support of Ukrainian safety, their freedom, and their brave fight to protect their country. So I'm holding them in my thoughts this evening. Contract zone ordinance review and discussion. I'm asking tonight, please, that this item be placed on an upcoming agenda with immediate attention to scheduling to ensure that it does. Mayor Doyle had indicated that this would be on an agenda in January after receiving numerous requests from citizens, numerous requests from a councilor, as well as a clear indication on the importance of this topic from a majority of councilors on November 8th when they voted to support an emergency 61-day moratorium on contract zones to review and improve that ordinance. And yet there has been no movement and no action on this topic after the city attorney ruled that the moratorium procedure was not viable on November 8th. On January 3rd, Council, you approved the council rules and order of business. And Section 10 of those rules is entitled Placing Items on the Agenda. I just want to read that for the record. Placing items on the agenda. Mayor or city council. The mayor or a council member may request an item to be considered on a future agenda. Such request should be submitted to the city administrator for review and action. Saco city staff. Many times city staff will have ideas, projects, or items which require council input or approval. Such items should be submitted to the city administrator for review and action. Members of the public. A member of the public may request an item and/or petition to be placed on a future agenda through communications with council members, hello council members, mayor, hello deputy mayor, and the city administrator. The city administrator or the mayor will review and act upon the request. Some requests may not require council action. So herewith, I'd like to make a formal request of the mayor or the city administrator to place the city's contract zone ordinance on an upcoming agenda to review the ordinance and the myriad of issues surrounding it as identified for the council and the planning board at the joint meeting on November 8th with attorney Natalie Burns. I'm sure we're paying Ms. Burns very good money for her expertise, and we should act on the weaknesses and shortcomings of that ordinance that she also brought forward to everyone's attention. So thank you for your attention to that matter. This leads me to concerns about an ongoing contract zone on my road, Simpson Road. I know that the turn lane discussion for the ecology school turn lane perhaps will appear on the March 8th agenda. And City Administrator Keenrath has assured me that the correct planning board motion will appear that evening. And I just want to read it into the record, if I may.
Ms. Brown, I just would like to remind you the 3-minute time limit.
How am I doing?
Just a little over 3.
Okay. I'll just read
could
this
just
into the
finish up.
record if I could.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
The applicant will implement the innovative traffic management solutions as noted in the traffic impact study. The applicant will work with the City of Saco and Maine Department of Transportation to design and construct a left turn treatment at the Simpson Road, Buxton Road intersection as warranted by the ecology school's current programming or by May 1st, 2022, whichever comes first. During design and construction, monitoring of traffic volumes by an independent third party shall continue. The applicant will amend its programming to ensure that vehicle trips generated by the ecology school stay under warrant volumes. Those traffic reports should be going to the planning board, not just to the planning department. They are supposed to go to the planning board for review, and I would just like to ask that there's follow-through on that item. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next on the list we have Jane Karen.
Good evening. I'm Jane Karen, 264 Lincoln Street in Saco, and thank you for your time tonight. I have a few topics that I want to speak on, and my goal is to keep my comments short. I want to thank Inga for the code of rules that she shared concerning the City Council agenda. And I have a date. Today is February 28th. Tomorrow is March 1st. I have a date in February that the mayor did state that he would most probably have contract zones on the agenda. They need to be, I believe, on one of the next 2 city council agendas. This is a request from many citizens, and the request is based on the high number of current contract zones in the city, the need to implement an improved process to create, monitor, and enforce any agreements made for any contract zones. The process must include costs to the applicants to cover the costs of the work and time for city staff. In addition, some enforcement needs to be included in the process. So again, I'm requesting that, among other citizens, that contract zones be on a council agenda. Next, I did want to mention that the monies allocated to the City of Saco through the American Rescue Act. I submitted my feedback on the survey sent out to the public, but understand from several comments from citizens that the survey apparently didn't run long, and many tried to put in their feedback, and the survey was closed. Others commented that it was noted as the IT updates, but not specific to Zoom opportunities, which caused some confusion because several citizens, and speaking for myself as well, and through Safe Saco Neighborhood and other interested citizens, that it's very important the IT upgrades cover the costs of the estimated $17,000 the city proposed as part of the remote meetings policy. I believe that was outlined on February 7th. These upgrades need to include Zoom with the capability of the public sharing their comments and feedback for city council meetings, planning board meetings, and school board meetings at a minimum. So if it takes a bit more than $17,000, that needs to be considered, please. I wanted to touch lightly on the new business of 32 Market Street, and I did want to remind the council that the citizens voters, as you know, accepted the bond with the intention this land was to be kept as open space. Through some of the comments made over the months recently, there were some important notes made that a full and complete boundary and right-of-way for a future Eastern Trail connection, as well as a connection to Diamond River Park, be made available to Saco citizens should this property be sold to any developer. Additionally, comments that any and all costs Saco paid in association with the cleanup and maintenance of this land be 100% recouped from any developer of this property. So these are important comments from citizens that you should please consider when any of this new business comes up for readings and so forth.
Jane, just to interrupt, but you are over the 3 minutes now.
Okay, well, I appreciate your time and thank you very much. Lots to say.
Thank you so much. Next on the list, we have Kelly Archer.
Hello, everyone. Please, I'm going to read it as I've written it, but part of it is for the mayor, so Deputy Mayor and Mr. Cainrath, could you convey the essence of my presentation to him? Thank you. I am Kelly Archer of 185 Bradley Street, Ward 5. On January 10th, 24th, and February 7th, I came before you to address many concerns and have received no communication or answers. Mr. Mayor, as the councilors per charter cannot seek out the answers from the appropriate departments, have you sought those answers in question? Have you requested Mr. Cainrath to address not only my concerns, but those of many other citizens and of the councilors? Many of these requests are years old, and I personally will keep asking and seeking those answers, and I do expect timely responses from my elected officials. To the council members, I urge all of you, or at least 4 of you, to submit the multitude of unfinished business items or new initiatives and make sure that the citizens' requests be included in the upcoming council agendas and/or have the city administrator address them appropriately within the departments per charter and respond to you and then you to us, the citizens that you were all elected to represent. I am very concerned that this council's 2022 4 agendas meetings have totaled less than 9 hours of city business, including 3 hours of executive session. With all the unfinished business and repeatedly requested agenda items from the councilors and citizens, it is unacceptable that only 6 hours have been devoted to us in 2022. There was a ton of work to be done prior to the budget process and comp plan approval. We are running out of time as the unfinished business should have been addressed months ago. Please rectify. I am highly concerned with the upcoming comp plan approval process. The failure to address the master plan development ordinance after its September 2021 moratorium expiration until the recent February 15th Planning Board workshop, which described a brief education of its definition, characteristics, elements, processes, purpose, and goals and samples. I have a link. Yet, several months later, there is still the failure of the recognition and implementation of an action plan of the much-needed and extensive revisions and additions already performed by Mike Eon and the former city planner prior to the comp plan approval. I am concerned about the failure to address the contract zone moratorium, which I believe expired about January 11th, 2022. From January 3rd, 1994 to November 20, 2017, with 2 amended in 2018, the city had a net of 41 contract zones approved in almost 24 years, 41. In 2018, the ZORS committee was formed in charge with reducing the amount of contract zones. How many contract zone approvals amendments have been added since the formation of ZORS, Comp Plan, LRPC in the last 3.5 years? Why wasn't an updated contract zone spreadsheet provided to the City Council on November 11th, 2021 for a more accurate picture? Has an action plan of the contract zone application process and updated inventory of contract zones and their many amendments, the fee structure addressed, or ordinance language reviewed and revised? It's been almost 7 weeks since its expiration, and I am personally continuing my research in the city archives to obtain the current data of contract zones. I am also requesting that the 178 FOIAs, brief description of which 10 are currently open since April of 2016 to present, be uploaded to a city webpage with the hopes of the City of Saco implementing a similar right-to-know practice of transparency as Biddeford going forward. Links provided. Prior to the comp plan needing approval by 2023, I am seeking moratoriums to be placed on master plan development, contract zones, and growth be implemented immediately to get this work done properly. Finally,
Kelly,
I also want.
Yep, you are at 4 minutes now.
Okay, this is quite important. I believe it's part of your executive session tonight. I also want to address my recent EDC Zoom visit on February 15, whereupon Jane Karen, also in attendance, and I heard the ED director, Ms. Clavette, mention that one of the two purchase and sale buyers requested a pre-occupancy of their parcel, which I presume was either 14 or 16 Phillips Spring Road, from the December 13th, 21 minutes, 3, 8, and 7 link provided. While this buyer is performing their due diligence prior to closing, she mentioned she believed that it was never done before in the City of Saco and that she knew of, and they could retain, advertise, market, and conduct business. She was interrupted by Jessica Berner, who stated that they were attendees, upon which it was decided to enter an unscheduled, unadvertised executive session. Councilors, please do not set the precedent within the city for the preoccupation of parcels that will undoubtedly increase our risk and liability, no matter how strong the amended contract language could be. It has not been done for a reason. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Is there any other member of the public wishing to speak? Great. Please state your name and address for the record, and please keep your time to 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Brochu of 257 Buxton Road. I wanted to take this opportunity to speak to you with regards to your first reading of the Chapter 81 review of the 32 Market Street parcel. I think that there might have been a little bit of an oversight in your packet. While it was correct that the April 6, 2021 Planning Board did send up a favorable recommendation, it seems that part of that recommendation was lost in your packet. The motion the Planning Board moved on was to forward a positive recommendation to the Council for the sale of the 32 Market Street parcel for affordable housing. However, the Board recognized tremendous value for the access of the Eastern Trail development and would strongly recommend a 40-foot strip be retained along the railroad tracks for this purpose. So when you look at your packet and you see a 6-1 or 6-0 unanimous approval, it wasn't just an unanimous approval to recommend sale. It was for you guys to consider that we recognized a strong need for the trail connectivity in that area. As we talk about trail access, the ability to cross over the railroad bridge, granted it may be far away, would tie in very quickly with Biddeford's current Riverwalk parcel, which is going to undergo some more review when they develop their Diamond Street parcel. Over 300 residential units are proposed to go in Diamond Street, and they're going to incorporate their Riverwalk to make their side of the river a little more appealing. At the same time, the Horrigan's Court pump station is going to be relocated, which is where their current Riverwalk passes through currently. Here again, great opportunities for them to continue their Riverwalk access. And when you look as the crow flies, that's a very short distance from where this particular parcel is. I think we can all agree, if you take any Sunday afternoon, spend a little time at Thornton Academy or out on the Ocean Park Road, decades of work from the Eastern Trail Alliance seems to have paid off. What a wonderful area for many citizens in our community to go recreate, bike, run, walk, cross-country ski. It seems to get a lot of great use. So if you happen to lean towards the recreational impact, recreational uses, as is called out in our comprehensive plan, both 2018 and the new draft, that's definitely something to consider. Understandable, the applicant's point of affordable housing is also something to consider. So with that, I would just hope that you would please recognize that the Planning Board gave great thought and reached out to the Eastern Trail Alliance, and that was where the 40-foot recommendation came from, is that width that they typically need for easements, for the amount of surface area that they need, and appropriate drainage. Then there's the flip side of traffic flow. As we all know, that area is seeing some development. We know that the Lincoln Street, the Kimball Health parcel eventually will be developed in some capacity. Probably not to the density that was talked about at one point, but there could easily be 100+ units in that area. When you add in the flow of the Diamond Street parcel in Biddeford that I spoke of, when you add in the additional units that are being built up on the Gooch Street side in the former Udy's building, anybody that's traveling northbound knows that it's a much shorter path to come through Saco than it is to stay in Biddeford and head south to get on their turnpike entrance. So, prospectively, this area could see a lot of development. And I'm just asking to have the foresight so that we don't end up in another situation, for instance, Buxton Road and Jenkins Road, 10 years in the process. The city, I think I read $390,000 to buy one parcel to try to align the intersection. Glad that we're doing it. It's just a long time. The citizens have waited a long time. This would be another parcel that I would propose to you that if we think about traffic flow, another very unique intersection, the angles at which they intersect, this parcel could have great value to the traffic flow, whether it be a rotary, whether it be alignment of the streets.
Sorry to interrupt, Jeff, but you are at 5 minutes now.
Thank you. So with the traffic, the accessible to the Diamond Park, the Irving Street Park, those are all great assets that the city should really consider and possibly being cautious, and rather than just gaining a few affordable housing units, to think of the betterment of all the citizens that have already paid for the reclamation of the site. Thank you for your time, and I apologize.
Thank you. Are there any other members wishing to speak tonight? Not seeing any, we will move on to item number 7, approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of February 7th, 2022?
So moved.
Councilor Berman, is there a second?
Second.
Is that Councilor Johnston? Okay, roll call vote. Councilor Rocher?
Aye.
Councilor Purdy?
Yes.
Councilor Gunn?
Yes.
Councilor Berman?
Yes.
Councilor Hatch?
Yes.
Councilor Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. And right now, we also have a presentation from Finance Director Salas, a city update.
Thank you, Councilor McPhail. Just give me one moment. I'm going to try and project the summary data for the budget update for those watching. Share. Let's try launching the application again. There we go. Okay, and for the benefit of those who may be watching online, the data that I'm going to present this evening is also available on the city's website under the council section for tonight's meeting under the More link. So what you have on the screen right now is a summary of general fund expenses year to date. At the top is a summary of our what is currently a net use of fund balance of $1.7 million year to date. Overall, the city remains in a strong financial position. Net use of fund balance year to date is $1.7 million. This should return to net income after the second half tax bills are received in March. The anticipated unassigned fund balance number for fiscal year 2021 is 16.62%, which is just below the target of 16.67% per the city code. I am actively working with our auditors on completing the annual financial reports. Staffing challenges on both the city side and the side of the auditing firm have delayed this annual financial reporting process, but we are actively working on bringing that to a close. Like I said, anticipated, we are looking at 16.62 at the close of fiscal year 2021. Year to date, the unassigned fund balance is calculated down to be 14.03 actually percent of the adopted budget. Now let's talk a little bit about expenses. Expenses are tracking 4% behind forecast. Code enforcement, capital projects, county tax, fire ambulance, finance, fringe benefits, insurance, planning, school budget, and TIF transfers are all considered on target because they are within 5% of their forecasted expenditures. Economic development, which is specifically called out on the expenditure side because we did split planning from economic development in fiscal year 2022. However, the economic development numbers that you see here are related to purchase orders encumbered from a previous fiscal year on accounts that were associated with economic development when it was budgeted in the general fund. As you may remember, the Economic Development Department for fiscal year 2022 was fully budgeted out of TIF districts. The others are below. So assessing is tracking 52% behind forecast. Assessing has forwarded a recommendation to the city administrator to pause efforts on the revaluation due to market volatility in the past couple of years. This reduces pressure on the currently budgeted $1.5 million use of fund balance for fiscal year 2022, which included $225,000 towards a revaluation. City administration is tracking 15% behind forecast. Software fees are light because the city's Zoom license was booked to another line in error. The correction was posted in February. The Mayor's Coalition, which is paid out of dues and membership, also has not been paid as of yet. City clerk is tracking 29% behind forecast. General assistance remains 60% behind forecast. As federal and state assistance has reduced the need for local services. With the child care tax credit expired and some other pending items, we are likely to see more demand on those services. Communications, 13% behind forecast. The AV equipment budgeted for this current fiscal year was not yet purchased through January. Contingency is 57% behind forecast. We had a really heavy year on tax abatements last year and a really light year this year, so that's reduced pressure on the line. And the senior tax rebate program payments have not yet been issued. Council is 9% behind forecast. The travel and training lines are underutilized to date. Human Resources is 24% behind forecast. The department was not fully staffed until mid-November, resulting in some savings on the pay lines. Information Technology is 10% above forecast. A PO for security software was held open after the purchase was made. This resulted in excess of $40,000 in the year-to-date total amount. This has been corrected in February. Parks and Recreation is tracking 17% behind forecast. Seasonal wages were lower than anticipated over the summer, and we are making adjustments to that line as part of the fiscal year 2023 planning process. Police is 9% behind forecast. Several open positions have left this department underspent. The cruisers have also not been purchased for the year due to supply chain delays. A portion of this surplus in the police budget is going to be reappropriated for the dispatch consoles per the budget amendment that is pending council approval this evening. Solicitors tracking 11% ahead of forecast. I did circle back with administration, and a number of TIF-related solicitor fees are going to be reclassed to the relevant TIF funds, which will reduce pressure on this line. Supported entities are 30% behind forecast. The city did miss January's payment due to just delays in mail processing. We're working with the Dyer Library to work on a digital invoice submission process so we can make sure that those payments are made in a timely manner. And then transfer 7,000 in AAA membership withholdings were booked to a payroll withholding account but paid out of a special revenue fund in error. This journal more or less corrects the matter by pulling the funds out of the balance sheet and then moving them over to the special revenue fund. I did skip over grants. $48,197 total in grant-funded projects has been expended to date. Okay, are there any questions regarding the expenditure side of this budget update? Yes, Councilor Berman.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure if the question is for you, for the assessor, or for the city administrator, but I was surprised to see the pause on the revaluation efforts. I understand the market volatility, but that's also a reason maybe why we need the revaluation. And I'm wondering when that's planned to restart.
Well, as you know, we've been discussing this for a couple of years. We started discussing this just before COVID hit. It's the assessor's recommendation, and there's some sort of conventional wisdom out there in the assessing world that because of the data being so skewed with such low inventory and extremely high prices the last couple of years, that it would be wise to wait one more year until we have, hopefully, some data that comes down to earth with prices and volume coming to more normal levels, and that may produce a better product. We haven't pulled the trigger on this since 2005 or 6. It's been a long time. And so the thought was that if we're going to spend $250,000, we want to make sure we do this with some good data that's not happens to be in the 2 or 3 really off years because of COVID and the way the market is now. So that's the sort of general wisdom we've gotten. Nick, I know, is going to be speaking to that as part of his budget presentation also, just his view of that. That's not set in stone. We could go ahead and still do it this year, but that is our assessor's professional opinion that would be wise to wait at least one more year and hopefully have some more normal market data in there in order to do this reval.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilor Hatch.
Gladys, I just a couple of questions on the, trying to get the right line here, the contingency line. You mentioned the senior tax rebate program has not yet been issued. I was just curious about what your current thoughts are. I know we've gone through the application process, and was it well received? Was it well? Did you get a lot of applications? Could you just give us just a quick snippet of how that went?
Certainly. I did just have a conversation with my deputy, Ms. Levine, today about it, and she said she did receive 100 applications. So I would say significant success. We did transmit to the state of Maine all the data we received from the applications regarding the property tax fairness credit, so we can confirm that the state has distributed the amounts as stated in the applications, and then we are set to issue those credit amounts on the tax bills probably the first week of March, certainly before the tax bills are actually due on March 11th. We do think, because of the significant amount that Council has authorized for year 1 of the program, as well as the fact that the first half were already paid, that we'll have a decent number of credit payments to actually issue, and we'll be mailing those out to the qualified recipients in mid-March. So overall, I think the community has really appreciated this effort by the Council. I know that Megan's worked really hard with Age-Friendly Saco and with everyone who's called her with questions about the program to assist in any way that we can. And I do think it's been a successful first year.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
And that's what it's all about. One other question.
Yes.
Parks and Recreation, 17% behind forecast. I'm just curious, you mentioned the seasonal wages were lower, but was that related more to decreased programming or understaffing, or both?
That's a great question. I do think there was some reduced programming over the summer because we were still kind of managing some of the effects of COVID-19. But also, I received feedback from Director Summer that there was some room in that seasonal wage line, so we've adjusted that and used those funds for more program-specific materials and other things that he needed in his budget for fiscal year 2023.
I guess it's a dynamic we'll have to think about moving into the next budget cycle, and probably relative to many of our departments. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Director Salas at this time?
So I'm going to move over on to the revenue side then. Let's see, here we go. So overall revenues are tracking 2% ahead of forecast. Building rentals, communications, fees, which are really franchise fees, fire and ambulance revenues, public works, which is mostly excise, and property taxes are all on target because they are within 5% of the forecast. I'll detail the remainder for you now. The assessor did have $15,900 in land use penalties. This is a bit of an unpredictable line. Some years we have more, some years we don't have any. It does depend on basically an individual sale in any given year. The city clerk is 51% behind forecast. Again, this is mostly state general assistance revenues, which are coming in late. They are tied to general assistance disbursements. Code enforcement is 31% behind forecast. Generally, there's been less new development versus what we forecasted for this year. Although what we are showing year to date is still in line with 2018 actuals. The department has indicated there are a couple big commercial projects in the pipeline which could boost these revenues significantly. Finance is tracking 15% behind forecast. Lien fees and interest really just have been shifted in this year because there was a shift in the lien date, which then pushed out the foreclosure date. So this should stabilize next year. Grant revenue, we have received $31,408 to date. Interest earnings are tracking 67% behind forecast. Due to competing priorities, the city has not been able to stand up an alternative to the repurchase account, which has been our primary interest-bearing initiative for unassigned fund balance. We are looking to circle back on this as we get through the budget process to revisit how we're making use of funds. Obviously, there's some market destabilization currently due to global events, so it's hard to predict what, if any, increase in interest earnings we'll be able to produce for the coming year. We are talking about moving some significant line items back to P-card purchase, which could boost our rebates on purchase cards and would help boost this line a little bit. Parks and Recreation revenues are 8% behind forecast. However, the department is confident that revenues will meet or exceed the $1 million budgeted with enrollments for summer 2022. So when you think about the timing of recreation fees, a lot of those fees are actually collected in the spring of the fiscal year for that coming summer. Police revenues 50% behind forecast. Outside assignment work has been light with pandemic restrictions. Parking revenue is slow. Public Works is looking to stand up the parking meter at the train station so we can collect parking fees from non-residents as approved by council in the fee schedule. State assistance is 32% ahead of forecast, so state revenue sharing was nearly fully funded in the governor's biannual budget. This surplus revenue offsets planned use of fund balance in the amount of $1 million from the FY 2022 budget process, which reduced the tax burden for our citizens. So in essence, we are making use of state revenue sharing as intended by the state, in that we did not tax our residents to the full amount of the budgeted appropriation for this current year. We have $19,712 to date in unallocated. Essentially, this relates to several payroll reconciliation items that flowed through this line. Again, cleaning up that AAA membership dues piece. And use of fund balance 0 to date. Use of fund balance is a placeholder account to balance the budget so that revenues equate to expenses. However, we don't actually receive anything in the use of unassigned fund balance. Are there any questions on the revenue side? Yes, Councilor Hatch.
I'm looking at the planning revenues comment,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to explain to you how I interpret that, and you can just say that's correct or incorrect. But the implication here is that we had poor billing procedures at one point that were rectified, have been changed, which I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that, but it's fixed, and that this problem will not likely occur moving forward because of those collection improvements. Is that a correct interpretation?
Yes, I mean, I would hate to say that it was a poor process in the past. I think the challenge with planning revenues is this is primarily related to planning individuals as well as individuals in other departments tracking their time specific to planning review. So as a salaried professional, how much time do you track every email that you read? That's 5 minutes here, that's 2 minutes here. I think the planning department has worked to structure their time a little bit in how they do planning review to ensure that we can truly bill our developers for everything that council has approved as part of the cost recovery ordinance. So I wouldn't say that it was done incorrectly in the past, more that there's been some tightened up internal controls about ensuring that we're billing everything that we can to the developers as part of the planning review process. Another piece really, as we talk about this, is that the planning department was expanded. We did add an additional headcount. So in terms of, I think, the time available for dedicated planning review as opposed to trying to toggle between things and multitask has been improved, and that's allowing us to bill a little bit better under our cost recovery ordinance.
Well, that's very important because
Absolutely.
we need to collect those fees. If we were a law firm, we'd be out of business. Okay, and I would highly recommend that we pay a lot of attention to that because otherwise we don't get money from the developers. We have to get it from the taxpayers.
Absolutely.
Okay, and they're supposed to be paying. Okay, so I'm just going to make a little bit forceful comment that we really need to get on top of that.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Director Salas? Not seeing any.
That's all for me. Thank you.
We appreciate your time. And for the record, we invited Director Salas at this time. She was supposed to speak with the school board, but because of the limited spacing up front, we asked her to hold off and pulled her in with the regular agenda. Okay, now moving on to consent items. We have 2 items for consent: the approval of the March meeting dates and criminal asset forfeiture, State versus Tremaine McWilliams. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Councilor Hatch, is there a second?
Second.
Councilor Johnston? Roll call vote. Councilor Archer?
Aye.
Councilor Purdy?
Yes.
Councilor Gunn?
Yes.
Councilor Berman?
Yes.
Councilor Hatch?
Yes.
Councilor Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. Moving on to action items. Action item A, we have a public hearing, City Code Chapter 112, General Assistance Program. And that is Councilor Archer.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Deputy Mayor. The City of Saco currently uses a General Assistance Ordinance dated August 2019, which was prepared by the Maine Municipal Association, MMA. MMA has a new General Assistance Ordinance dated September 2021, which contains revisions and updates to state law. I move to open the public hearing.
Councilor Etzer has moved to open the public hearing. Is there a second?
Second.
That was Councilor Johnston. Roll call vote. Councilor Archer?
Aye.
Councilor Purdy?
Yes.
Councilor Gunn?
Yes.
Councilor Berman?
Yes.
Councilor Hatch?
Yes.
Councilor Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0 to open the public hearing. Is there any members of the public that would wish to speak? Okay, not seeing anybody. Councilor Archer?
Yes, I move to close the public hearing and set a final reading for March 7th, 2022.
Is there a second?
Second.
Councilor Hatch? Roll call vote. Councilor Archer?
Aye.
Counselor Purdy?
Yes.
Counselor Gunn?
Yes.
Counselor Berman?
Yes.
Counselor Hatch?
Yes.
Counselor Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes to close the public hearing and set the final reading for March 7th, 2022, 6-0. Moving on to item B, one reading, Community Resilience Partnership Resolution. Counselor Hatch.
The Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future has opened a new grant program to fund energy and sustainability initiatives outlined in the Maine Climate Council's Maine Won't Wait Climate Action Plan. Municipalities that join the Community Resilience Partnership become eligible for these grant opportunities, which range from $5,000 to $50,000. In most cases, there is no required local match, and the grant amount may be increased to $100,000 for partnership projects of 2 or more municipalities. On February 16, 2022, the Energy and Sustainability Committee hosted a public workshop to review the program and gain feedback about the recommended action items. The Energy and Sustainability Committee reviewed this program at its January and February meetings and recommends that the City Council pursue partnership enrollment. I move to waive the reading of the Community Resilience Partnership Resolution. Be it ordered that the Saco City Council approve the Community Resilience Partnership Resolution, and I move to approve the order.
Second.
Counselor Johnston. Counselor Hatch makes the motion. Counselor Johnson seconds. Are there any questions? We do have Director Carter, if anyone has any questions. Okay, not seeing any. Roll call vote. Counselor Archer?
Aye.
Counselor Gunn? Counselor Purdy?
Yes.
Counselor Gunn?
Yes.
Counselor Berman?
Yes.
Counselor Hatch?
Yes.
Counselor Johnston?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 6-0 to approve the partnership resolution. Okay, next we have updates to Chapter 118. And that is Counselor Berman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Staff proposes updates to Chapter 118 Harbor, River, and Waterfront, including changing the oversight of the Harbor Master position from the Director of Public Works to the City Administrator. Changes have been reviewed by the City Solicitor. The City of Saco hereby ordains and approves the second and final reading of Chapter 118 revisions. I move to approve the order.
Counselor Berman has made the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Counselor Hatch? Any discussion? Counselor Gunn?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Earlier today, I had sent an email to my fellow councilors because I was just reviewing the 118 ordinance chapter, going through everything. And when I came down to, on 118, Section 8 on page 20, found a little something that needed a little wordsmithing, though, and I'll bring it to the public's attention just so everybody's on the same page. The paragraph reads, the owner, captain, or operator of a vessel involved in a collision with another vessel, a wharf, pier, landing, dock, or other fixed object within the harbor, fire on board, or an accident as defined by the United States Coast Guard, must report such collision, that's my emphasis, collision, to local law enforcement or the harbor master by quickest means. And while the following section makes it clear that any of the above, the following section that comes after this makes it clear that any of the above incidents that go unreported would result in a penalty, the use of the word collision in the above part is confusing in that it immediately contradicts the preceding explanation that any of those incidents should be reported. My suggestion is to basically substitute the word incident for collision, because, as I said, it covers all three of those things, but then when they say collision at the end, it makes it seem as if they're only talking about a collision, and if you have another incident on your boat, you can just let it go unreported, and I wouldn't want to see anyone thinking they can skirt the law if they want to really, get in the weeds on it. So I put it before the council because I While it really doesn't change the substance of the ordinance, though, I don't, if we need to have an actual formal amendment, I'd offer it. But if it's something that can be wordsmithed, I'd be happy to have it that way. So I'll leave that up on the council. Thank you.
City Administrator Kenrath, is that something that we can just change in the wording? Or?
Yeah, I think if there's consensus, I think it's not a substantive change, then staff can just make that change. But if you'd like to present it in the form of a motion, I think that's fine too. But I think I'm comfortable just making that edit if there's consensus here to go ahead and do that.
Is there any objection by any councilors to put that in just as an edit?
Well, I think I'd prefer just to make the amendment. I'd be concerned that in the future, someone may hone in on the fact that what was presented to council reads differently than what is in code in the future. So we might as well just correct it now.
So you'd like to do an amendment?
I mean, I'll second it if Joe wants to go ahead and make it.
I'd be, thank you. Nate, I'd be more than happy to. I move to amend Chapter 118, Section 8, page 20, replacing the word collision in must report such collision to law enforcement to incident. So it will read, must report such incident to local law enforcement or the harbor master by quickest means.
Second.
Okay, so the amendment to change the word collision to incident has been made by Councilor Gunn, seconded by Councilor Johnston. Roll call vote. Councilor Archer?
Aye.
Councilor Purdy?
Yes.
Councilor Gunn?
Yes.
Councilor Berman?
Yes.
Councilor Hatch?
Yes.
Councilor Johnston?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes for the amendment, 6-0. Back to the main motion. Is there any other discussion on the main motion? Okay, roll call vote on the main motion as amended. Councilor Archer, excuse me.
Aye.
Councilor Purdy?
Yes.
Councilor Gunn?
Yes.
Councilor Berman?
Yes.
Councilor Hatch?
Yes.
Councilor Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. Okay, item D, final reading, budget amendment number 5, police dispatch consoles. Councilor Purdy?
Thank you. The city's police department radio vendor has informed us that the current radio consoles in dispatch are no longer manufactured or supported. In short, if one of them stops working, the city cannot get a replacement, not even a used one. The cost to purchase 3 new consoles is $175,000. Due to the current supply chain delays, staff has requested we expedite this capital item. Funding will come partially from the savings in the police department budget and partially from the general fund unassigned fund balance. Be it ordered that the council approves the second and final reading of budget amendment number 5. I move to approve the order.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made by Councilor Purdy, seconded by Councilor Johnston. Any discussion? Okay, not seeing any discussion. Roll call vote. Councilor Archer?
Aye.
Councilor Purdy?
Yes.
Councilor Gunn?
Yes.
Councilor Berman?
Yes.
Councilor Hatch?
Yes.
Councilor Johnston?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 6-0. Okay, next we have a presentation, I believe by Director Salas again, on the ARPA prioritization exercise follow-up.
All right. Let's see if we can get this to work again. right, here we go. So, ARPA prioritization. A little bit of background for those viewing the presentation who may not already be familiar with the acronym ARPA. The federal government has issued stimulus funding to states and municipalities in order to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on local budgets. The city of Saco specifically has been allocated $2,108,513 under the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, of 2021. The purpose of this exercise was to allow council and citizens the opportunity to prioritize how the city of Saco expends these funds between broad categories of qualified items. All 7 councilors and the mayor completed the exercise, and 361 citizens responded to the poll issued by Communications, which I think was a significant response given that there was a tight timeline on the poll. And the reason that we did have a pretty short timeline on that poll simply had to do with the fact that we wanted to make sure that citizen responses were rolled into the budget review meetings that took place last week and the preliminary conversations that the city administrator has had with his departments on how we may expend these funds as part of the budget process. I conducted the analysis 3 ways in compiling the information. The first was to look at how councilors and the mayor specifically distributed the funds, so how much money was actually distributed between the broad categories that I handed out. Then I took a look at how many councilors were supportive of any amount of funding in any of these categories. And finally, I received the results of the survey. So what the citizens got was a much simpler version of what the council completed. In essence, they simply ranked the ARPA categories from 1 through 12, and then were provided the opportunity to talk about whether it should be spent all in 1 year or across multiple years. And then we're given sort of the opportunity to provide some unstructured responses about what projects they would like to see. So I took the percent allocation of funds, council support, the number of councilors who supported any one of the categories, and the citizen ranking, and added those numbers together to create a final score. I do want to pause here and thank council for proposing the idea of including citizens as part of the survey. It really did provide an interesting amount of color in terms of what our citizens are thinking in terms of what they would like to see us expend the funds on. And it's an exercise I'm hoping that we can continue to incorporate into our budget planning processes in future years. It allows what sometimes can be a silent majority of our citizens who don't necessarily show up to council meetings or participate online. It does give them an opportunity to provide feedback. So there were 2 categories that sort of pulled out far ahead of the others. And the reason for that was that they received by far the strongest allocation of council spending, as well as broad council support, and more mid-level in terms of their citizen score, not super high, not super low. The clear winner in terms of funding allocation was capital funding for parks and open spaces. And certainly over the last 2 years, our parks and open spaces have been critical for the physical and mental health of the citizens of Saco through lockdowns and as a way to decompress from what I would say has been a very stressful couple of years. The second category that received a significant amount of funding was capital funding for right-of-way, so roads, parking lots, sidewalks, etc. So then there were several categories that fell into this mid-tier, and if they fell into the mid-tier, they probably had a strong score on one of the 3 metrics. Maybe they had strong percent allocation, broad council support, or they were a top scoring category with our citizens. I have highlighted in yellow the top 3 spending categories based on citizen feedback. So the top one was public health services, including COVID-19 response, testing and PPE, mental health and substance use, and general public health services support. Number 2 was housing support, so affordable housing and services for the homeless, which I found to be really interesting. And again, we are facing a lot of pressure. A lot of people are facing a lot of pressure in terms of both housing costs and rental costs. And then the third category for citizen response was childcare, so recreation programming, et cetera. The other one that I did want to call out was capital funding for IT infrastructure. It received 8% allocation, council support, the broadest council support actually of any category. And I did see that hybrid meetings were called out by a couple of councilors, specifically in the unstructured capital projects portion of the exercise. It did score low for our citizens, but I think it's fair to say that none of these other categories are possible without strong IT infrastructure. It does undergird pretty much everything that we do here in the city of Saco today. And then, you know, in any prioritization exercise, there are categories that fall more to the bottom. These categories tended to be categories that were weak on one or more of the scores. The wastewater treatment plant, and I think specifically this one scored relatively low because we do have, you know, $50 million in bond issuance already approved, so there's significant funding mechanisms in place for this. Hazard pay was closer to the bottom in terms of both council support and citizen scoring, and then capital funding specifically for public safety fell to the bottom. So the second piece of this exercise was really about the pace of spending. Do we spend it all in 1 year? What years do we spend? So council had the ability to really allocate the funds between years, and more or less that broke into a 40-40-20 split. So a little over 40% in fiscal year 2023, a little under 40% in 2024, and then a little under 20% in 2025. This makes absolute sense. We only do actually have the first half of fiscal year 2025 to expend these funds. So this is the pace of expenditure that we'll be thinking about as we look at what projects are coming through the budget process. Citizen responses, I would say, were roughly similar. So a little bit over 50% wanted us to split the funding between fiscal year 2023 and 2024. So pretty close to that 40-40 in the first 2 years. 30% of the citizens wanted us to split the funding across all 3 years. And then less than 20% wanted us to spend all of the funding in 2023. So I do think both on the council side and on the citizen side, there's sort of clear guidance to level this out more or less between the first 2 years. This is just a preview. It's difficult when you have there was an unstructured space for citizens to talk about specific projects that they want. It's difficult to go through and classify those, especially when you're talking about over 300 responses. But this is a word cloud that the survey data built for us. And sort of what floated to the top, obviously, is traffic. So rather in line with council's significant allocation for right-of-way funding, there's sort of a voice here about traffic, improvements, roads, sidewalks. Camp Ellis, I think, was called out, again, related to infrastructure, and then housing and safety, which comes more or less back to that affordable housing piece, which we know is important in the survey. In terms of council unstructured responses, the top council project was the Teen Center, so that was explicitly called out by 3 councilors. 2 councilors did call out IT infrastructure to support council meetings. Like I said, like you could see in the previous slide, citizen responses did emphasize traffic and other right-of-way projects, and there was a bit about housing and safety as well in those citizen responses. So what are the next steps? So we're actively in the process of budget planning now. City staff are submitting qualified projects within the categories that we've discussed previously. The city administrator will decide funding, and we are using this prioritization exercise actively as a guide. Council will then have further opportunity. This isn't the last that we'll be seeing of this exercise. You as councilors have the opportunity to further allocate funding and amend the city administrator's budget during the process, which is, of course, finalized in May. And I am working to track project costs over all 3 years in a best effort to match a 40-40-20 split on ARPA funding. Are there any questions about this exercise or the categories? Yes, Councilor Berman.
Not so much a question about that, more of a comment followed by a question. Given that public interest was so high in this activity and the feedback seemed useful, is it possible to put potential projects out for public feedback also, or what does Saco need, or somehow get a way to get some public input into innovative challenges that could make use of one-time funds in an unexpected and creative way? It's unlikely we'll have this opportunity again, and there may be things that the public has in mind that we wouldn't think of on our own.
That's an excellent question. I think certainly we can work with communications on how they would like to draft that. I don't know, City Administrator Cainrath, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, we can work with communications on potentially doing another community survey with specific projects in mind instead of just categories and focus areas. So, we'll have to develop, I think, a list of qualified maybe projects, or I think you're also looking at just getting general feedback too for projects that may not be on our mind, but maybe on their mind, and what we should be looking at.
And I'm not sure which would be more useful given the timeline of the budget and when we need to spend this. But you're right, I seated both ideas. One would be to just get general feedback about other projects that the city should be undertaking that aren't currently on our radar that could make use of one-time funds. And a second idea would be if there's 8 or 10 projects being considered by city heads and as the budget process, to get a sense, and if we can't do them all, to put some out for public prioritization.
I mean, I certainly think we already have, there was that, I mean, that question was in the survey, so we could certainly kind of go through those responses and actually read them and see if there's something that's kind of floating to the top in terms of something very specific. And then we can work with communications on, a follow-up survey potentially, or any additional analytical tools they might have for sort of reviewing the data and identifying what's a top priority.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Of course. Yes, Councilor Hatch.
I would like to just echo Councilor Berman's comments here. I'm absolutely delighted we had 361 responses. Yeah. And I would think that once the process is in place, that could actually improve. And getting that feedback I would find very helpful both for the spending of the ARPA money, but also as we kind of deal with budget priorities and projects as well. So I just want to support Councilor Berman's comments.
Okay. Councilor Johnston?
Thank you. Along those same lines, I'll be the echo to the echo, I guess. I mean, first, thank you on behalf of myself, but also, I mean, the feedback I've received from residents has been phenomenal about this process. So thank you for putting it together kind of on the fly. I'm sure it was a lot to crunch, and again, I'm not tech savvy, so I just think it's a phenomenal tool going forward. And again, if it is something we can keep using, I would highly encourage that. Like I said, the feedback I received, people were really engaged, way more than I expected on such a short notice. I mean, I had people stopping me and telling me, hey, this is such a great tool, So again, thank you.
And I do want to compliment communications. I mean, I took the survey myself when it came out, and it was fun, it was snappy, it was easy, and I think it was very clear sort of what we were asking for. And so communications is a great partner on that as well.
And it does state in our packet that you will be bringing this back to us on the 28th of February. Oh, that's today. I'm sorry. It is almost March 1st, isn't it? I apologize.
It was a fast month.
Thank you. Okay. So this will be back to us during budget sessions.
Mm-hmm. We'll be
allocations
referencing this actively. Yep. And we'll do a follow-up on the unstructured data from the survey to see kind of what floats to the top in terms of project recommendations, and see if communications has ideas for how to solicit additional feedback.
Any other questions for Director Salas? Okay, we're not seeing any. Thank you so much for the presentation. Appreciate the update.
Of course. Thank you.
Okay, next on the item agenda, item F for adopt council goals. Councilor Purdy?
In January, February 2020, the City Council developed, prioritized, and adopted 9 high-level focus areas and goals. These focus areas and goals set the stage for 3 years, serving to frame policy changes, budget development, projects, and priorities for the rest of fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21 and 22. Strategic focus areas and goals, 2022 prioritization exercise. At the February 7th, 2022 council meeting, the City Council revisited the 9 focus areas and goals and 3 new focus areas and goals that took the outcomes of the draft comprehensive plan and the market analysis into consideration. A prioritization exercise was held, facilitated by Denise Clavette, Economic Development Director. All 12 goals identified are very important to Saco. That said, when it comes to strategic direction, policymaking, budget development, city operations, decisions should be made considering the priorities in place. Being mindful of limited resources regarding time, staff, and funding, the goal was to narrow and land with 9 focus areas and goals. Outcomes of the prioritization and focus areas and goals 2022. The outcomes of the prioritization for focus areas and goals are below. The City Council will be asked to adopt these. Number 1 was financial stability. Number 2, schools and infrastructure. Number 3, economic opportunity. Number 4, growth and innovation. 5, governance. 6, transparency and engagement. 7, livable community. 8, environmental sustainability. 9, organizational excellence. It is interesting to note the 2022 outcomes in comparison to the prioritization exercise held in 2020. Number 1 was financial stability. 2, schools and infrastructure. A new goal from the draft comp plan landed at number 2. Number 3, economic opportunity. A new goal from the draft comp plan landed at number 3. 4, growth and innovation went from number 1 to number 4. Governance moved up from number 9 to number 5. Transparency and engagement remained at number 6. Livable community remained at 7. Environmental sustainability went from number 2 to number 8. Organizational excellence went from 8 to number 9. In addition, downtown, a new goal from the draft comp plan landed at 10. Quality service went from number 3 to 11. Transportation and transit went from number 5 to being the last priority at number 12. All that said, be it ordered that the City Council approve the 2022 focus areas and goals.
Motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Councilor Johnston?
Yes.
Any discussion or comments? Councilor Johnston?
Oh, thank you. Just, I guess, my own observations. I mean, I think it's good to see that the school department or the needs of our schools has risen to a high priority. I think all of us in this community would agree that it is a high priority, and for quite some time it seems it's been fragmented or separated from the needs of the city, or at least how we viewed them. With that, I'm hoping that by council placing this as a high priority, they're going to, or we are, going to come out of, whatever comes out of this school construction committee and be fully in supportive of it. Outside of that, I mean, I think my counterpart and I, being the deputy mayor, being the ward, or the downtown wards, share probably the same feelings as far as being a little bit disappointed to see the downtown, not rated higher. I understand we did a democratic process here. We've used it in the past, and we're certainly not saying it's not a priority. But from my perspective, I've been on council 8 years. I've listened to numerous people. I've listened and read and participated in countless plans that recite the same stuff over and over about promoting our downtown, increasing downtown infrastructure. So, I mean, in 2017, I worked with the former city administrator and economic development director to create a TIF district to actually bring about, some financial mechanisms to improving the downtown. And largely it's 2022, and I've yet to really see much of that come to fruition. So I'm really hoping, as we move forward as a council, we kind of reconsider this and start putting our money, to good use and stop giving the downtown lip service, because that's personally how I have felt for 8 years. It's a lot of lip service coming from a lot of areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Johnston. Councilor Hatch?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McPhail. I have some comments I want to make, and I've scripted them, so you have to forgive me. I want to make sure I'm on point. These are very important comments for me to make at this juncture. I first want to say that I'm a very strong proponent of strategic planning, and I look forward to using this reprioritized list as a focal point for council action moving forward. I have worked for several banking organizations over the years and have experienced operating struggles resulting from poor leadership coupled with ineffective strategic action planning. Fortunately, I've also been a part of a banking organization that stood on the precipice of failure in the early 1990s, only to reverse its fortunes to become a currently dominant bank industry player in the eastern part of the United States. Now, that reversal did not happen by itself. It took strong, focused senior management leadership that developed clear goals, created viable, productive action plans to achieve those goals. Those action plans required a very high degree of accountability from the less senior employees like me. The reward for everyone within the organization was the successful execution of those action plans and the many benefits they derived for us and the organization. It can positively affect the public image of the organization and improve the morale of its employees. Everyone loves to play on a winning team. This reprioritized list of council goals provides a clear vision for the near term. However, what I think we all need to understand is that action plans leading to substantive accomplishments of these goals will require effective leadership from the mayor and the city council and productive execution from city staff. My constituents in Ward 5 consistently challenged me to update them on what specific action plans are in place to accomplish many of these stated goals. As their council representative, I am happy that they do that. I can provide some answers, but sometimes I'm not sure myself, and this needs to change. So I would like to leverage this discussion tonight and offer a challenge to both myself and my fellow councilors. We need to improve the process, and I am willing to put my money where my mouth is. By the end of this week, I will submit to the city administrator my suggested action plans affecting the top 4 council goals on the reprioritized list we are looking at tonight. It will not mean that the other 8 on the list are not important. They are just less important based on what I hear from my constituents. Successful change agents take baby steps forward, carefully considering the needs and concerns of all stakeholders. I will also make specific action plan suggestions for the city administrator to consider. I would challenge my fellow councilors to do the same. Other councilors may have experienced different constituent feedback, resulting in different action plans. That's okay. It's supposed to be an open democratic process. From that input, I would humbly and respectfully ask that the duly appointed gatekeepers of the city council agenda, namely Mayor Doyle, Deputy Mayor McPhail, and City Administrator Cainrath, collate and prioritize further. From that exercise and the use of the new business section of the City Council agenda, we can all collectively move quickly to publicly discuss specific action plans to achieve the goals that have been outlined tonight. I have come to learn from experience working with many organizations that creating high-level goals is the easy part. Putting together a focused action plan to accomplish those goals is the more challenging part. The devil is always in the details. I look forward to continuing discussion very soon in future City Council meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hatch. Any other questions or comments? Okay, not seeing any. Roll call vote. Councilor Archer?
Aye.
Councilor Purdy?
Yes.
Councilor Gunn?
Yes.
Councilor Berman?
Yes.
Councilor Hatch?
Yes.
Councilor Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0 to adopt the council goals. Next on the agenda, item 10, we move to new business. Chapter 81, conveyance of city-owned property for 32 Market Street. I believe City Planner Garnham, are you presenting this? And City Solicitor Murphy? Welcome, thank you.
Good evening. So, I believe you have all seen this come up before. This is a proposal to enter into the Chapter 81 sale of city property process for the property at 32 Market Street. That is a 1.5 acre parcel located on Market near its intersection with Lincoln. Did a little research on this property of its history. My understanding is it was originally donated to the city back around 2000, 2001. And subsequently, the Saco voters passed an open space bond measure to raise funds for purchase of open space and recreation properties. And $40,000 of those bond funds was contributed toward cleanup of environmental contamination on that property. So fast forward to 2013, the city council at the time approved an agreement to sell that property to an affordable housing developer. I don't know why it took so long, but 3 years later, in 2016, a purchase and sale agreement with the Southern Maine Affordable Housing nonprofit organization was drafted. For reasons I don't know, that agreement didn't result in a project. And fast forward again to last year, 2021, this proposal resurfaced and went to the planning board as a Chapter 81 sale of city property. Went to the planning board, who forwarded a positive recommendation. And as mentioned by Mr. Brochu earlier this evening, that proposal did include both an easement along the southern edge of the property for as a spur for pedestrian or bicycle facilities from the Eastern Trail. And it also included at the time in the purchase and sale agreement provisions for 10% of future resale of the properties to go toward an affordable housing fund that the city would administer. That agreement, of course, has expired, and I understand that this proposal was reviewed by you all twice last year. And watching those meetings, I understood that there were two larger questions that you all were really interested in getting more information or confirmation on. And the first of those questions were, what are the repercussions? What are the potential repercussions of the city selling this property, which was not acquired through, but was cleaned up using open space bond dollars for non-open space purposes? And the second question was, what, if any, are the remedies for doing so? And my understanding is, based on input from the city attorney, Tim Murphy, who's, of course, right next to me, is that there don't appear to be any serious legal
repercussions that might come from this. Any other repercussions would be potentially to sort of the appearances for voters who may or may not be studying the matter. And then remedies, I do think the proposed easement that was in the that was approved by the planning board is one potential remedy. Of course, there are probably many others that could be written into a purchase and sale agreement. Another that I thought of is the possibility of, rather than having those resale funds put into affordable housing funds, they could be dedicated toward recreation and open space facility investments. You all probably do know through the Chapter 81 process, you, the City Council, do determine both the method of sale and you can set the conditions that would need to be incorporated into a potential purchase and sale agreement. So that's my reintroduction to this this proposal, and my understanding is, again, the decision before you is whether or not to pursue this and schedule the first reading in the coming weeks.
Thank you. Any questions for City Planner Granum? Councilor Johnston?
Thank you. I don't know if it's so much a question, just continued comments. Thank you for taking the time. I know that you weren't here last summer for most of this, but thank you for reviewing the tapes and yourself and Mr. Murphy looking into the legal questions I had at the time. I think largely from what I've read, it just really reconfirms what I was saying last summer, which is, and again, my own history with this predates all the way back to 2011 when I first read about it in the paper. The acceptance of this land at the time when it came from the oil company back in, I think it was 2005, was the intent was as park. Okay, so then the bond had already in place. The idea that you could use brownfields to clean that land up made sense, and I think Mr. Murphy's opinion even says that at one point. Then this idea of affordable housing came about later on, and it continued forth that way. I can't purport to know what a prior council was thinking, but I do know that Mr. Murphy's legal opinion back in 2011 suggesting against doing such was not included in their packet. I have spoken to those councilors at the time that didn't fully understand, the legal implications, or at least the advice by their attorney saying that it's a disingenuous act, which is how I continued to view this. It's a disingenuous act. You can say, oh, what's the big deal? Well, it is a big deal because we have a bonding capacity, as we all know. We just did $50 million. What if we only spend 35 and then we take 15 and we spend it how we see fit? That's an issue for me. It's not one I take lightly either, because I think it's one of the larger responsibilities we have. So I understand, and I said this last summer, I think we all support senior housing. I don't view this property as the best location for it, given all the implications we have here. We've had, a speaker earlier tonight that got up that actually, enlightened me to something I hadn't really thought about, which is that intersection and the potential needs in the future to do some kind of upgrade. I mean, it's right now it's not signalized, but I definitely could see in the future where, there is that need, and where are we going to be when we've decided to, add a density to an area that's already relatively congested. So I don't know if I have so much a question. I just, again, restating what I've previously said, and I'm not really even sure why this is back, given that it didn't seem like there was much support for it last summer. Again, it's, in my opinion, it's a disingenuous act to move forward with this. I guess, if I did have questions, and I think I brought this up before, which is, could we, I guess what I would want to see moving forward if council is going to move this forward would be to have those funds I think it was 40,000 or so, replenished into that open space bond that last I checked still is on the books. So that's the cost of buying the land. Last I checked, we were giving this land for $1, I believe. So having those funds back into that account so that we can put them forward and use them for the appropriate purpose makes sense to me. The other thing that was brought up by Mr. Brochu is, again, I was at that planning board meeting, and I recall exactly as he described that motion and the conversations about the Eastern Trail easement. And that was a sticking point for me again last summer, is that they're presenting an easement that does not meet the needs of the Eastern Trail. And so I don't know if we've had any further discussions with the Eastern Trail. I understand they're willing to, or the potential buyer is willing to give an easement, but it is not a continuation of the Eastern Trail. I get it. Ultimately, it brings you, somewhat to the same location, but the whole idea is to have the synergy and not have to get off down here and then back, track back over to where the trail continues. So I would seek that 40-foot easement that has been recommended by the planning board, and I think the Eastern Trail and members of that body would also like to see. There was also, if I remember correctly, some discussion from staff members about SOAR bond funds that had recently, or maybe it wasn't the SOAR bond, but the Lincoln Street bond that we just did for repaving and some of the upgrades there, about their desire to have some of those funds back, given that we had just expended those bond funds, and now we'd be cutting into the road and whatnot, and I think we put in a SOAR connection. The other thing that, as I reread through that, the 10% recoupment clause that was in the plan from 2013, could be wrong, but I do recall discussions last spring that didn't seem to be in play anymore. So I'd like that answered as far as that 10% recoupment for affordable housing that the city would administer. It's something that I was interested then, and I'm still interested. I think it's something that the city council needs to consider, period, going forward, and creating a fund similar to what Portland has, where we start charging developers, a fee to put towards affordable housing. So I don't know if you have an answer about the recoupment part, but just look into it if you don't.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments or discussion? Councilor Archer?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Deputy Mayor. Again, yeah, I remember I wasn't interested in it at the time for various reasons. A lot of them were brought up by Councilor Johnston. I still kind of not. I don't really have an appetite for this right now, especially with the current market as written. I'll be a little bit more clear. Why do we have to have a developer-friendly agreement when the market's as crazy as it is? Why can't we have it be a citizens-friendly agreement? We do not need to reduce the cost of this property in this market. Again, initially, I'm not really on board, but things with more information, selling it for market value, and then taking the sale of the market value and putting it into a different open space within a reasonable time frame, now I'm starting to be a little bit more open to this discussion. I don't know what the value of that property is, but if we immediately kind of repurpose, if we said, hey, we got this land, we bonded it for open space, we sell it, again, there is some disingenuity, like, hey, this is what we want to do and we're not doing it. But I think there could be an argument that says if we find a different location and move it, so in the end it's still open space, it's just not the original location, it's somewhere else, I would have more of an appetite, but as this agreement I'm not interested in. The one that was presented even last year, if I remember correctly, it was very similar. And of course, I'd want the easement as well. So, thank you.
And Councilor Hatch.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McPhail. I have come like full circle on this thing, and it's because of the good work of the historical perspective. So, Councilor Johnson, I appreciate that and the work that you folks have done. And Tim, you and I share a rotary pin, and I'm into the I'm really concerned about the disingenuous nature of this decision. I think as a sitting council member, I feel we have a fiduciary duty to our voters who clearly indicated that this was going to be open recreational space. So I'm in the camp of not participating in this sale or supporting this sale. I would prefer to go back to its original roots and do with the property as we said we would. And I think, Tim, in one of your comments, you mentioned that there's likely other areas of the city where we could work together to put together an affordable housing program of some type or process, and I wholeheartedly agree with that as well. So I am going to be on the side of no on this issue.
Any other discussion? Councilor Berman?
Yeah, thank you. I don't find myself so able to make up my mind as maybe some of my fellow councilors. It seems to me that we've made actually two commitments regarding this property. We've made a commitment via our open spaces bond to our taxpayers to keep it open. We've also made commitments to the SMAH to help them develop this property to create affordable housing. We have commitments we've made on both sides, which is part of what makes this complicated. In addition, we have really competing priorities. They're really strong priorities. Our city is in desperate need of affordable housing. I don't think anybody would question that. We've heard that the out-of-control housing prices have actually stopped us from performing a revaluation. They're rising quickly, so quickly people can't afford to keep up. We've also had to put in a senior tax abatement program to help ensure our seniors don't lose their homes. And at a time when all of that is occurring, to turn down the opportunity of a nonprofit to build affordable housing for seniors is something that I think shouldn't be taken lightly. Of course, those are competing against interests for open space, which is a significant interest. We've just heard that was the #1 citizen interest, is creating open spaces and recreational opportunity, putting a competing interest there. And of course, we have the interest of the Eastern Trail, which, well, not directly, well, the Saco City Council isn't directly responsible for. It's an incredible asset for our community and would bring in tourism and support our community and our community goals. And the easement they proposed here clearly doesn't meet the needs of the Eastern Trail. And you can look at their website now for what they propose and see what it is they're looking for. And the proposed easement is not it. So while I fully recognize the problems, I'm also highly reluctant to turn down an opportunity to create affordable senior housing. And if there was any way to do that, any way to create such a situation where it was amenable, and I think just speaking directly to Councilor Archer's concerns, the reason to give away the property and to create a developer-friendly model here would be to facilitate that affordable housing, right? They're selling the housing at below market rate and therefore need below market rate property in order to do so. So I'd be interested in seeing if those problems can be resolved, if land can be traded, if we can create solutions that allow us to create an Eastern Trail, to keep open spaces, and to create affordable housing for our seniors. If there's a win-win-win out there, I would like to find it. I understand the concerns about being disingenuous, but of course, nothing is permanent. Things change as needs change, and here we have a solution to a real pressing need for affordable senior housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilor Gunn?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. City Planner, I just had a question. I'm not sure in your research going through this whole Byzantine sort of situation, do we reach out to basically the Eastern Trail folks? And because I mean, anytime anyone's ever been on the Eastern Trail, you see the maps of the proposed route through Saco Biddeford, which basically at this point, to Councilor Johnston's point is, yeah, you got to pretty much get off on the road, then eventually get back on the trail, and there you go. Have they shown any concrete interest in actually using this easement, to your best of your knowledge?
I didn't see any communication from the Eastern Trail Alliance. I think that easement was initially proposed by one of the commissions here, possibly the Conservation Commission. I'd have to go back and there's quite a few documents in our files. I'd have to go back.
Okay,
read
so
through to
it's not like something, yeah, that they're really like, this is the one place we got to have the trail then?
No, I don't think it was anything like that.
Council Berman?
The Eastern Trail Alliance has held 2 meetings regarding Eastern Trail expansion through Biddeford and Saco. The second one is coming up in a couple weeks. And if you go to the Eastern Trail Alliance website, you can see a proposed area of interest and route map, which includes the railway corridor along this property.
I would just add that right-of-way over the Black Bridge is, as we refer to it, it dates back to at least the 1999 comp plan. So it's definitely been discussed. I mean, Bob Hamlin would probably be the best contact for that because he sits on that board and has been a big advocate of that extension.
Thank you.
Okay, Council Hatch?
Thank you. I think this debate of housing there or recreation there, I get both arguments. And it gets back to what I just said about putting together action plans. You know, I'd like to think that 7 councilors and a mayor could figure out how we could find an alternative site for affordable housing in the city of Saco. And if we did, I think it would alleviate all this justifiable pressure that you're talking about. And frankly, that is one of the suggestions I am going to be submitting to the city administrator. I have some thoughts. That doesn't mean they're cast in concrete, but I think we have to get the conversation going. And I'd like to think collectively we can come up with some sort of action plan that can try to address the issue while maintaining the integrity of that original decision and leaving that particular parcel as recreational. So I have a lot of confidence that if we work hard together, we can figure that out.
Solicitor Murphy?
Thanks, Jason. Well, if I could, when the city administrator and I had an opportunity to meet with these particular developers, we did propose an alternate site. The city tax acquired a relatively large parcel on the corner of Grant and 112, right, which easily could be carved off into 4 or 5 lots. So, and with some creative use of planning would be actually a better site. One of the things that's always struck me about the current site is the public optics of putting elders or low-income housing on a former hazardous waste site. I'm not sure that's something you all want to embrace when there are better sites available. And if I could add, in all my years dealing with this project, I think this is the first time I've actually had a chance to ever speak to the council about it. Written several memos, but never had a chance to talk. So there isn't, I believe, a legal risk to you in altering some of the approach of the funding, because I think the idea of a citizen coming forward and suing the city is unlikely. However, the term you're using, disingenuous, let me put that in a different context for you that is a risk. So let's say next year you decide that low-income housing is a priority and you want to pass a bond for that purpose, which would be a very good idea. You're going back to the very same voters, asking them to pass a bond when you just have voted and said, you know, we don't care what you tell us. We're going to disregard it and use the money how we see fit. So the legal risk you're running is that you're losing credibility with the very voters you depend upon for all your future activities as city councilors. So transient immediate pressures can induce us to do things that if we took a moment, we'd realize jeopardize longer-term interess. And so I think your collective credibility as a council is what will suffer a blow if you disregard the will of the very voters that enacted the open space bond. Now that ultimately is a call for you as councilors. And there are ways to mitigate against that. And the planner has made a number of them, discussed several of them tonight, one of which is sell it and redirect the funds to open space. Well, that is a way to still assure that you're meeting the purposes of the bond, but we tend to forget that bonds are promises to voters
and investors.
And so I just wanted to point that risk out to you, because while it's not exactly a legal risk, it could become a long-term risk for you as new projects come forward that you do want a bond for. And I'm sure the city administrator's office can find other additional parcels that we tax acquire parcels every year. And they get circled around the different departments for comment, including, is there some other creative reuse? So senior housing could certainly be one of those. And as I say, the Grant Road was one we actually offered or suggested to these very developers. So I thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so this is new bit. Councilor Johnston?
Yeah, I guess, just to reply, my concern last summer was, again, I think it's probably unlikely prior to us discussing it that anybody would have even really known about this or brought any form of lawsuit. The fact that we sat here for meeting after meeting and kind of aired out our dirty laundry had me concerned, because we do have at least some frequent flyers in the past that would have, latched onto this and probably brought a lawsuit. But my larger concern was that disingenuous nature, not just to the citizens, but investors that are investing money in a project that we said we were going to do. My concern was, had somebody notified bond banks or bond counsel that we were now taking those, those funds and reverting them somewhere else, or worse, selling the property that we actually invested the money in, it could have hurt our status with the bond bank. And then the other thing I was going to say was back to Councilor Hatch's point. I think that, again, we're all in support of senior housing, affordable housing. It's definitely a need. There's no question about that. I'm very familiar with the rental market, so I understand what the market's actually, dictating out there. But this isn't a one-off approach. We need to have a strategic plan. And back in 2009, they did an affordable housing study that was incorporated in 2011 comp plan. And it really never went anywhere as far as how to address those needs. And again, as I stated earlier, I think it's something as a council we need to put at the forefront and look at how to actually address this, because, a random property here and there is not going to do it. So I agree with Attorney Murphy. I thought at the time when the Buxton Road properties came up and we went through that Chapter 81 review, that was my thinking, because we had just done the Habitat Humanity for the Marguerite Road. So it's still an option. Last I knew, we still own it. So I think maybe we pursue that and, take this lot and apply it the way it was intended. I know that Director Summers has a plan for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so this will be coming back to us on a future agenda. At this time, Councilor Hatch, you are listed as the resource. Are you okay with that?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, item number 11, we have administrative update.
All right, thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. Some city staff updates I wanted to share with you. I recently had the opportunity to recognize 20 of our Saco City staff members who have reached their 5-year milestones of service to the city. I'd like to again thank them for their dedication, talent, and knowledge as they continue serving our residents in our community here. I'd also like to thank our communications department who put together a great video of their recognition of service that's available to watch on our YouTube page if you haven't seen it already. We'd also like to welcome some new hires to the city and wish them lots of luck and many years of success here with the city of Saco. Shannon Coffey in PD Dispatch, Stephanie Smith, a new PD Patrol Officer, Monique Pomeroy, a new Quality Assurance Technician in PD Dispatch, Kevlin Danis, a new Facilities Custodian, and James Wakeham, in our Public Works Department, a light equipment operator. So welcome to all those new employees, and we wish you much success here with the city. We'd also like to recognize one significant milestone in retirement. that we recently celebrated for Roger Martin in our Public Works Department, who is retired after 32 years of service to the city in our Public Works Operations Department, specifically 29 years as a truck driver who had a passion for plowing snow. The department recently threw him a retirement party with his family present to thank him for his many years of service and all that he's given for the community, and we wish Roger a well-deserved and happy retirement, and thank you again for your many years of service here to Public Works, our roads, and to our city and to our citizens, so thank you. Lastly, Mary's Walk is coming up on March 20th, and as we have in past years, by the way, this will be back in person this year. As we have in past years, the city wellness program will cover the registration fee for the first 20 city employees who'd like to participate in the event, and participants can choose from the 5K run or walk. For more information on that, please contact Amelia Meyer in our Parks and Rec Department. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the administrator? Okay. Item 12, council discussion and comment. Is there any discussion or comment? Okay, not seeing any. We move to item 13, executive session. Is there a motion for executive session? Councilor Berman?
Sure, Madam Deputy Mayor. Be it ordered that the City Council enter into executive session pursuant to MRSA Title I, Chapter 13, Subchapter 1, Section 405(6), for the purposes of A, human resources discussion, and C, economic development.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Councilor Hatch? Roll call vote. Councilor Ratcher?
Aye.
Councilor Purdy?
Yes.
Councilor Gunn?
Yes.
Councilor Berman?
Yes.
Councilor Hatch?
Yes.
Councilor Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0 to enter executive session. And welcome back. And is there a motion to get out of executive session?
So moved.
Motion made by Councilor Hatch. Is there a second?
Second.
Councilor Berman or Councilor Johnston? Roll call vote. Councilor Archer?
Aye.
Councilor Purdy?
Yes.
Councilor Gunn?
Yes.
Councilor Berman?
Yes.
Councilor Hatch?
Yes.
Councilor Johnston?
Yes.
Is there a report from executive session?
Yes, Madam Deputy Mayor. We have no report from Human Resources discussion, but we do have a motion relative to economic development. I would like to put forth a motion to authorize the city administrator to negotiate a property for lease for 14 Phillips Spring Road with the purchaser who has the property under purchase and sale agreement with the city for the duration of time until the closing, with terms and conditions in consultation with the city solicitor.
Motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Councilor Berman? Roll call vote. Councilor Archer?
Aye.
Councilor Purdy?
Yes.
Councilor Gunn?
Yes.
Councilor Berman?
Yes.
Councilor Hatch?
Yes.
Councilor Johnson?
Yes.
And motion approves for the city administrator to enter into that. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Councilor Berman, is there a second?
Second.
Councilor Hatch? Roll call vote. Councilor Archer?
Nay.
Councilor Purdy?
Yes.
Councilor Gunn?
Oh, let's have a little fun. No.
Councilor Berman?
Yes.
Councilor Hatch?
Yes.
Councilor Johnson?
See.
Motion passes 6-0. Thank you, everyone. Oh, I'm sorry. Motion approves 4-2. Have a good
It's a dangerous game you guys are playing.